Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today I'm going to be ranking every typing in terms of their viability in a Nuzlocke. So typing is definitely a big factor that comes into play when you're choosing which Pokemon you want to catch, or like which starter you want to use. It shouldn't be the only factor, but it's definitely a factor that does come into play. For those of you who are thinking like, hey, maybe you should leave the Nuzlocke rankings to PChal, A, f you, but B, my opinions on what I think and how I feel towards a typing is going to be completely different from what PChal thinks. Our experiences are different, so our opinions are going to be different. I also do want to make it clear that this is just my opinions, and how I say and what I feel about a typing should not dictate how you guys play your Nuzlockes. I'm only doing this to guide you guys and to give you insight on what I think are good and what I think are bad, so that you guys can improve your Nuzlocke skills based on what I say. So if you do enjoy this video, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below telling me how you feel towards a certain typing. Alright, let's get started. So first up, we have the bug type. Bug types to me are C tier. Whenever you think of a bug type, you think that they're weak, and that's definitely for good reason. Bug types tend to have the lowest base stat out of any other typings, and they do have a lot of weaknesses. They're weak to fire, flying, which is very common. They're also weak to like rock, which is also very common. So it's just not the best typing to have if you have other options. Some of the good things about bug types is that they do get access to a lot of like status moves. So like Confuse Ray, String Shot, Stun Spore, Sleep Powder. A lot of these moves are really useful for bug types, especially because without them, I don't think they'd be viable at all. Another thing that bug types really have going for them is their early evolution. Bug types in general have a total base stat that's about like 150 points lower than average, but bug types are able to use those final base stats earlier on in the game. So you can get your hands on like a Butterfree or a Dustox, which has like about 400 base stat total, even before the first gym. So it's going to be very useful at the start, and then slowly as you make progress into a Nuzlocke, you're going to realize that, hey, it's starting to fall off a little bit. But even though bug types do get to use their final base stat total really early on in the game, there's a lot of gym leaders and like boss Pokemon that are really good against bug types. So a lot of like first gym leaders are rock type or flying type. So think of like Faulkner, Brock, Roxanne, Rourke. These are all rock / like flying type Pokemon that are really good against bug types. So even in the beginning of the game, you're not going to be using bug types that much. You might use them for like trainers or rival battles, but other than that, bug types really don't see that much use. So bug types, definitely C tier. You could argue low B, but I think for now I'll keep them in C. Next is the dark type. I think dark types are probably like high B tier, maybe low A tier. Dark types are kind of average when I think about them. It's not that they don't have much going for them, they certainly do have a lot. It's just that compared to other typings, it's not a lot. One thing they have going for them is that they're immune to psychic types, which is really useful because psychic is a pretty strong typing. But other than that, there isn't much going for them. There are a lot of good dark types like Tyranitar, Bisharp, Drapion, Weavile. These are all really common, really good dark type Pokemon. Like, I don't think that's because of the dark typing, I just think that's due to the individual Pokemon. Dark types do get a lot of like gimmicky moves like Sucker Punch, Taunt, Knock Off, Nasty Plot. Those are all really good moves that like, they can definitely give you the edge when you need it, but like they're nothing like game changer. So I think for now, dark types are going to sit in B. I might move them to like low A, depending on how the tier list ends up, but for now, I think they're B tier. Dragon types. Dragons are A tier for sure. You could argue for S tier, but I don't think so with the introduction of Fairy. So one thing that's good about Dragon types is that they boast really high base stat totals. So if you think of like pseudo-legendaries, final form Dragon types like Haxorus, Flygon, Kingdra, these are all Dragon types that have really high base stat totals. Dragon types do have the potential to be S tier even without Fairy types existing, but the thing is that in Nuzlockes, Dragon types are really rare. You find them like late in the game. It's really hard to find a good Dragon type early in the game. Like there's a lot of things that you have to do to use its full potential. Like for example, Hydreigon, it evolves really late, which is something that is a setback for it. But I guess they are good in the fact that if you do find one, you can basically build your team around that dragon type and just set it up so that it can sweep every battle. Definitely an A tier type. I guess one other thing to mention is that dragon types are only good against themselves. There's always some dragon type specialist in every game. So like think of Lance, think of Claire, Drake, Drayden. These are all dragon type specialists. So dragons having only one good type matchup against themselves favors fast and aggressive dragon Pokemon. And fast aggressive dragon Pokemon are really hard to find early in the game. You typically find them late, like near the end, or you probably don't get them at all. Next is electric. It's like high C, low B. I'll put in C for now. So electric types are kind of like the glass cannon. They are good against really common typings like water and flying, but they're way too easily countered by ground types. Generally, electric types don't really have good coverage, so it's really hard for electric types to do anything against a ground type. So like if you think of Volkner in Platinum, if you have any fast Pokemon that knows a ground type move, you can basically just sweep his team. On the other hand though, they are only weak to ground, so they're not completely F tier. So if you know that there is a ground type on their team, you know that they're going to send out the ground type. So at least you can do some like pivoting or maneuvering with your electric Pokemon. Fairy types. Fairy types are definitely S tier. First of all, having a good type matchup against Dragon type is already something, so that's already enough to make it like a high tier Pokemon. But another thing that makes them so good is that they only have two weaknesses, being Steel and Poison. Steel types are rare, so it's not often that you're going to come across one, and Poison types are really easy to counter. You can learn like a ground type move, or most fairy type Pokemon learn like Psychic or like Psyshock. It's definitely something that you can work around. Fairy types also usually have like really wide move pools, so like Solar Beam, Thunder, Blizzard, moves like that, so they're really good for like covering your weaknesses. And overall, that makes them a really strong typing. Next is Fighting. Fighting to me seems like a B tier typing. So the thing about Fighting is that they have no special investment, which means they don't take special attacks that well. There are a lot of good fighting Pokemon, but they are weak to some of the most common typings. Flying Pokemon are super common, they're found in every game. So being weak against flying is something that you have to watch out for. Also, in my experience, fighting types don't really have the widest move pools. They're usually limited to like fighting, normal, sometimes rock, sometimes ground type moves, but that's about it. They can learn some like elemental punches, but other than that, there's not much they can learn. So yeah, definitely a B tier typing. I don't think I can consider putting them in A tier. Next is Fire types. Fire types is A tier. Fire types offer some really good coverages. Not so much against Bug and Grass, mainly against Steel. Steel is like super powerful, so having a good type matchup against Steel is really something that goes for it. Another thing that makes Fire types so good is that with Fire types, you can set up a Sun team, right? And when you're able to have a weather condition of some sort, that really sets you up for success. So if you are able to get your hands on a Fire type, you definitely want to be using it on your team. There are a lot of like good dual type fire Pokemon like Chandelure, Volcarona, Infernape, and they have a lot of resistances. I think 6, which is second only to Steel. They are definitely a really useful typing to have. Definitely A tier. Next up is Flying. So Flying types, A tier typing. Super common, super fast, super offensive. You can pretty much find a Flying type in every single game, so it's more than likely you're going to need to use one. Also as a flyer too. Flying types are also able to cover their own weaknesses, and they have a lot of good dual type Pokemon like Gliscor and Skarmory. So you're more than likely going to be using a flying type on your team. And for that, I'm going to have to put them in A tier. They're good against fighting, they're good against bug type, grass type. These are all pretty common types in Pokemon, so having a flying type is going to be really useful. Overall, I think flying types are really easy to use in a Nuzlocke. Like if you're having trouble figuring out what your 6th Pokemon slot should be, if you put a flying type in that slot, it's more than likely going to be an advantage to you than a disadvantage. Ghost types, B tier. They're kind of in the same position as dragon types, where they favor fast offensive Pokemon because they are good against themselves, but they don't have the best Pokemon to represent the ghost type. Like there are definitely good ghost types like Gengar, That's the only one that can, like, or like Dracopult. I don't think that's the ghost type. It's just the individual Pokemon. Ghost types are also pretty rare in most Pokemon games, so it's not likely that you're going to get your hands on one. And they're really useful for stalling Pokemon. So let's say you're pivoting, or let's say you're PP stalling. Having a ghost type on your team is going to be really useful. It's not good enough to be A tier, but I could say like maybe high B tier. Grass types are unfortunately C tier. Maybe like worse than Bug. There's too much going against them. They don't have the best type matchups. More often than not, the purpose that they serve can easily be covered by some other typing. Say, for example, water for like ground types. Water is just a much better option. The only reason I'm not putting it in F tier is because A, you can use them on sun teams, right? Most grass types get like Chlorophyll, Leaf Guard, and they have moves like Solar Beam, which are pretty good moves, so I'm gonna put them in C tier. And also, if you're not using an electric type, you kind of have to have a grass type on your team to counter water Pokemon. So you need to have an electric or grass type, and for that, I'm not gonna put grass type in F tier. Ground type. I'm gonna put ground types in A tier. So ground types are pretty like average Pokemon, but like they're good average. They're immune to electric types, which is really good for like pivoting. They have pretty good type matchups, especially against like Steel. Ground types are also generally like pretty bulky. So if you want to use them for like stalling Pokemon, ground types are a great option if you're not going to use like rock or steel types. There's really not much to say about ground types. They're just overall a really solid typing that most teams should have. Ice types. I think ice types are going to be like low B, maybe high. I think low B is good for ice types. So if you think that electric types are glass cannon, ice types are like paper cannon. Like they have no defensive investment at all, but they're really good offensively. So there are a lot of good ice type Pokemon like Weavile, Frostlass, Vanilluxe, and they all perform really well offensively, but they just all have no defense. They are good against really common typings, like they're good against flying, they're good against ground, and they're good against dragon types, which is another thing. So I definitely think that ice types are B tier. Overall, I actually would not recommend using an ice type because they are really niche to use. You have to set them up really well before you can actually like implement them into your like game plan. Normal types are an A tier typing, definitely. So in terms of like type matchups, they're only weak to fighting, and they're actually immune to ghost, so they can be good for like pivoting against ghost type trainers. Normal types generally have really wide move pools, so like a lot of them learn like Ice Beam, Flamethrower, Thunderbolt, so that's really good. And they're really good for like covering your weaknesses. So let's say you have like that 6th spot that you have no clue what to put on there. If you put a normal type in that spot, it's more than likely going to be a good team rather than like a bad team. So think of your Snorlaxes, think of your Audinoes, Miltanks, Tauros. These are all really good Pokemon, and they all fill this niche really well. And overall for beginners, I do recommend using a normal type because they cover your weaknesses that well. Poison types, I think are the only F tier typing in this game. So one thing that is good for poison types is that they're super effective against fairy types, which is really good, but they're too easily countered. So it's really not ideal to have a poison type on your team. Personally, from my experience, I think poison types actually hurt a Pokemon more by having the poison type rather than not having the poison type. Poison types, F tier for me. Psychic is A tier. I'm not going to worry about what the order is in between, but for me, Psychic is definitely A tier. Psychic types are really strong. They're also specially invested, which is not something you can say about most typings. Ice is, Fire is, Fairy is, but then like most other types are physical typings. I guess Psychic types are really solid for the same reason that ground types are really solid, but speaking in terms of like special investment. So they're specially bulky and they're specially offensive. Think of like Gen 1 Psychic types, right? They were so broken that they had to introduce the Dark type just to counter Psychic types. I think that speaks enough on its own to give Psychic the A tier. Now we have Rock. So Rock is one of the 2 defensive typings, the other being Steel. And unfortunately, it's the worst of the 2. Rock is like mid B tier. So Rock types are good like early game because most early game Pokemon only have like normal type moves. Rarely do they have anything super effective against rock unless it's your starter. Rock types early game are really good because they're good for like pivoting, stalling, stuff like that. But once you start to make progress and you get like better and better Pokemon, you'll realize that rock is not exactly the best for stalling. Like even like bulky ground types, bulky normal types, steel types at that point, even bulky water types are better at stalling than rock types. I think they're kind of like Bug where they start good and then they slowly drop off. And one thing about rock types is that rock moves are really inaccurate for some reason. So think of like Rock Tomb, Rock Slide, Stone Edge. They're really inaccurate for no reason. I have no clue why, but those are the moves they have access to and they just happen to not be the best moves. Rock types in general are really slow. I think rock is like dead center in the middle. Second last typing is Steel. Steel, S tier for sure. It is the defensive typing that you think of. Steel is unique in that they invested everything into defensiveness. I think that just works out for them so well because they have so many resistances. If you think of any typing, if it's not super effective against Steel, it's most likely going to be resisted by Steel. Steel types are your primary go-to for stalling or pivoting, and a lot of dual Steel type Pokemon are good because they have the Steel typing. So think of like Magnezone. It's good because it has the Steel typing. Bisharp is really good because it has the Steel typing. So a lot of these Pokemon become good because they have the Steel typing. Steel types are indeed rare, but if you do get your hands on a Steel type, you're more than likely going to be using it on your team. Another thing going for it is that Steel type is good against Fairy. Combined with the super defense, definitely an S tier type. Water is the other S tier typing. So water Pokemon are really easy to use, kind of like normal types, except they don't have the drawback of not having any type matchups. So water types really common. You find a lot of them in every game, so there's no need to get a starter. And you can easily implement them on your team because their weaknesses are so easy to cover. So grass types, super weak. You can cover them with fire, flying, ice, whatever. And for electric types, you can get yourself a ground type Pokemon, and that easily covers their weaknesses. A lot of water type Pokemon also have really good dual typings that pair up well with each other. So like Swampert Gyarados. Swampert covers Gyarados' weaknesses, and Gyarados covers Swampert's weaknesses. You're more than likely going to have a water type on your team. Also, water is one of the types that Steel does not resist. It's actually neutral. So that's something that really bumps water type up to the S tier. Maybe even the best type in Pokemon. I think water is like tied with Steel, but like they have arguments to being the best type in Pokemon. So here it is. This is my tier list on how viable I think each typing is. Let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree. Again, this is just my opinion. It's not meant to dictate your Nuzlocks. If you did enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. And until next time, thank you for watching.